Yeah, I guess those are got me stopping and thinking about these are really big issues. And I think a student who's encountering this, or even myself, I'm thinking, wow, what could I do today? Is there anything that I could do, right now, today, that seems something immediate to protect my rights, my rights to privacy, and not only my rights, but also the rights of those around me who might not have a voice, who might be one of those ethnic or religious minorities that you were mentioning, Ulises. Is there anything that I could do kind of immediately? And then is there anything that I could do as an individual, to prepare for maybe a month or two down the road that I could then take action on? I think there's kind of these phases of action. Phase one of like something I can do today, and then phase two, something I can do down the road. What would you say?
Wow, well, that's always a difficult question to answer because there's so much. And, I try actually in my classes not to prescribe things with a heavy hand. I don't tell students, you have to stop using Facebook today, or, Amazon is evil, don't use it. I myself use Amazon. I am out of Facebook, but, those choices are, in some ways, it's kind of like boutique kind of activism, to select which platform you want to participate in and which ones you don't. There might be some benefit to doing that, but at the end of the day, I don't think that's going to be enough. I think if we really want to change things, we have to be involved to a larger degree in political processes. Like I said earlier, that law that's going to allow the FBI to look at everybody's browsing history is being debated right now. So what can we do, and us as professors, and what can students do as students? I think these are things that take the whole of civil society, to participate in. Another thing that worries me is that with COVID-19, we're suddenly very isolated. And I'm not saying that activism is only about going out into the streets and protesting, although as we're seeing, right now in response to yet another death of a Black man by a police officer. And there are protests that are happening even right now that, I'm glad that those voices are being heard. But meanwhile, most of us are stuck at home and we cannot we cannot go out into the streets and protest. And like I said, that's okay. That's not the only way to participate. I think, obviously, I'm a college professor. So obviously, I think the first step is to educate ourselves. The first step is to understand what the issues are and to realize what is at stake if we do nothing. And maybe that's a very limited starting point, but at least as a college professor, that's what I can contribute to this process.
Right. Well, and I think, be able to have conversations like these ones, and hopefully, well, students who are watching, I hope so, this is exactly what the intent of this video podcast is to it's not only students, but, anybody who watches the video podcast to understand that data is extremely important. And I want to talk about a little bit about data history, so we can have a perspective how data have been used maybe in the wrong way during history, when actually collecting data wasn't that easy, because that's the other thing. Technology is allowing to connect data like in 2 seconds. They know what we're doing, where we are, what we're talking about. 20 years ago, recollecting data was a totally different story. And of course, I want to talk a little bit about data colonialism. I know it's a long topic to be able to resume in a video podcast, but I think it's a fascinating concept. So can we have a little bit of example of his data history, and also what do you mean with data colonialism?
Yeah. Well, let's work backwards a little bit, because you're right. I think today we think data and we think, or data, however you want to say it, and we think digital data.
Data
You say data, I say data.
In my Spanglish is data.
Yes, me too. Sometimes I go back and forth. I can't decide how to pronounce it. But we have been collecting data for a very long time. So for instance, let's think of the census, which is another thing we're going through right now. But that practice goes back thousands of years, and different societies throughout history have been collecting data about their citizens in the form of a census. The difference is that that data was always very public. It was the job of the government to collect it, and its utility, its usefulness was always supposed to be for the public good. So we have to think about what has changed a little bit about that. But let's give another example. Your shopping cart. When you go to Tops, when you go to Wegmans, you have a little card that you swipe to get the discount. That's another form of data collection because yes, it's nice to get the discounts, but basically what that allows is a supermarket to collect information, to collect data about what you buy, when, how often, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another form of data collection. If we keep going backwards, we have insurance companies. That's all they do, right? Collect data and make policies and plans depending on that. So those are the examples that predate even just the internet. So let's not just think about data in terms of the internet. That's one point. But if we go back further in history, let's start to talk about colonialism, which is one area, as someone from the global south, I've always been very interested in. And so that's my recent work, which Francisco is kind enough to plug in during this interview, is a book called The Costs of Connection, which I have co-authored with Nick Coldry from the London School of Economics. And it's about this, it's about data colonialism. How do we use the lens of colonialism to try to understand some of what's happening today with the data? Now, in a nutshell, yes, colonialism, as you know, the kind of colonialism we're talking about was when Europe went to the rest of the world, Latin America, Africa, Asia, and basically said, oh, this looks like a very nice plot of land. Yes, there are people living in it, but guess what? Now it belongs to me. I'm going to appropriate it. I'm going to expropriate it. This land now belongs to me. And all of the people living in it, guess what? Now you're my subjects. And now you have to work for me. So that's basically, what colonialism was. This country, the United States, was also founded in colonialism because, people arrived at this land. And yes, they were Native Americans living here, but white people decided to just appropriate this land. And so now it became a nation, it became a country called the United States. And so that's the history of it. But data was also very important to the colonialism enterprise. Even though this was, 500 years ago, 200 years ago, before computers, before the internet, information was crucial to the colonial enterprise. I'm just going to give you one example. Think about maps. In order to colonize a territory, you need a map of where it is, what lies to the north, what lies to the south. So you need to collect information and then analyze it and render it in a visual form to produce a map that tells you what your colonies are and where they are located. And you need to collect data from the people living in those lands, also to manage them, to make the consumption of resources more effective. So data has always been part of the colonial enterprise. What Nick Coldry and I are arguing in our book is that there is something similar going on today. It's not about grabbing land. It's not about forcing people to extract the resources from that land. What's being appropriated is life. It's human life as abstracted through data. So when I am on Facebook or on WhatsApp and I send a text message to my mom, that's not work. I'm not working for Facebook. I'm not getting paid by Facebook. I'm just having an interaction with my mom. But all of that, the interaction is being commodified, to use a technical term from Marxism. It's being abstracted. Certain value is being abstracted from that interaction. And guess what? Mark Zuckerberg makes lots of money, from figuring out how to do that. So underneath all of these social transactions, underneath all of this daily life interactions and exchanges, there's data that's being abstracted, there's data that's being collected, and it's data that's making some people extremely rich. So that's basically what the book is about, how we have gone from cheap nature, the idea that nature is just out there, it belongs to whoever can appropriate it and exploit it, to cheap labor, The idea that certain kinds of human beings, it's okay to exploit them. It's okay for them to provide free or very low paid labor to make certain people rich. So cheap nature, cheap labor. Now we have cheap data. The idea that data is just there for the taking. Like, well, again, why should I care if Facebook is collecting all of this data? I'm getting to use this product for free. But the book is about starting to realize how there's certain inequalities in this process and how cheap data is not cheap at all, right? I mean, we have to care about what happens with this resource.
It's very interesting. It really, really is an interesting concept. Yeah. Are you familiar with the movie Minority Report? It's a great movie. Do you think we're going there, meaning that data, tomatoes, are going to be used to classify us into these groups of people where the government in some point will have control thanks to the information that we're collecting to classify us in different scenarios?
Francisco, I have some bad news for you. Are you ready?
Don't tell me that that's the case.
It's already happening. It's already here. So maybe not in the fancy, glossy way. And, I don't think Tom Cruise is sitting around at home doing this kind of thing. But in many courthouses across this country, judges are using algorithms to help them make decisions. And police units are using algorithms to help them make decisions. And there's been a couple of great reports, including by ProPublica, the New York Times, I believe, where they've shown that, guess what? Those algorithms are not neutral. Surprise, surprise. They have biases because humans have biases, right? And so to the extent that artificial intelligence is learning from humans, it's learning some of those biases as well. So sometimes, for instance, judges are trying to make a decision about whether a particular person is likely to commit a crime again. Guess what? If the person is a white male, that person might get a low score. It's like, no, this person might not commit a crime again. If the person is a black female, even though the crime that she committed might be small and insignificant or minor, the algorithm says, oh, watch out, this person might be a problem in the future. So that's already happening. And let's not even talk about like facial recognition and algorithms, for instance. So again, facial recognition is already being used. And by the way, this is not just in the United States. China is another big example where unfortunately scary things are happening around facial recognition and algorithms.
Like for example?
In China, it's very convenient in some way because you can go into a store, pick up your groceries and walk out of the store without having to swipe a card or pay cash. Facial recognition algorithms recognize your face, they connect it to your bank account, and they deduct the amount automatically. It's convenient also when you go to the train station and you can just board a train, and it already, because of facial recognition, the system already knows where you're headed because it's 5 o'clock on a Thursday, so you're headed home, and it knows that. So again, you don't have to pay, you don't have to even purchase the ticket. Of course, the downside of that is that China is trying to connect a social credit system to that system. So for instance, if you have been posting, they don't have Facebook, they don't have Twitter, they have the equivalents. But let's say you have been posting things that are critical of the government. Well, your score is going down. And now when you're trying to board that train, guess what? It's not letting you because it's already recognized that you are a bad citizen and your privileges to travel by train have been revoked. There's also very sinister ways in which the COVID-19 situation has been linked to that. We know, for instance, that facial recognition and cameras can now also read your temperature so that you can see, it's not just Francisco walking around campus, but maybe you have a fever. And so we're going to block you from entering the auditorium because, you're a dangerous person. And you're seeing an alert on your phone that you should go to the hospital immediately because you no longer have permission to travel freely. And by the way, some people might be saying, well, I'm wearing a mask, so then facial recognition won't work. Actually, the algorithms have now learned to recognize your face even when you're wearing a mask. So, in some ways, it's the Minority Report world already is here to
Wow.
stay.
That's quite scary, like very scary actually. Because again, I know a lot of people would feel like, oh, that's fantastic. What an awesome technology. But
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know if it's that awesome. I just want to thank you for your time, your expertise. I'm going to give you the opportunity to close very quickly to give a message to our students and all the students that are watching the video podcast in these times that we're living in. So we can start with Ulises and then we close with Serenity.
Well, I guess I would just say, this past couple of months have been extremely hard for you and for us as well. And on top of having to adjust to new teaching modes, et cetera, I know that people have been feeling isolated. And I was reading some statistics yesterday that I think about a third of the country are now suffering from anxiety or depression. So I would just say, take care of yourself and try to think about this as a temporary thing. I think, yes, the world has changed and there's no going back to normal. I think there's a new normal waiting for us. But hopefully, this experience has allowed us to think about what we value, what we should value, what we care about, and the importance of face-to-face interaction and communal, living and being able to stand close to someone we love and have a conversation with them. I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen in the near future and if those things are going to be possible. And we should definitely respect, the rules that make everybody safer. But maybe use some of this time to reflect about what's important to you. And once we emerge from this crisis, what things are going to be important to you, whether it's staying up until 2 a.m., what, like Professor Suarez is saying, looking at Facebook, or whether something else is going to be as important as that.
Yeah, so I guess my message would be, I would say exactly the same thing as Ulises has said, but seeing how he already said that, I would also talk about how this time in the past few months has really alerted me to the dangers of misinformation. I think even before, obviously, the pandemic, misinformation was a huge issue, particularly politically, political misinformation. And I think I always thought, I know I always thought that that was really terrible and that it shouldn't happen, but I was also kind of thinking of it in the terms of like, well, it's those people, they're choosing to have this misinformation. But I can now see how this misinformation is harmful to even innocent people, because it's becoming very, very difficult to decipher what is true and what is not true, especially when we have people in power who are claiming things to be true that are just blatantly false. And I see a lot of different people I would never have expected, who kind of take this information as a truth, or take conspiracy theories about the pandemic as a truth. And I think that's really disconcerting to me. So I guess I would say in this time, yes, practice self-care as Ulises is suggesting, but I think also we need to combat this misinformation. And that is something I think that we all individually can do. And so I think, we need to contemplate how we can use our voices and speak from whatever positions of power we may have, or whatever positions of influence we may have, to try and educate people about how they can be more media literate, how they can review sources, and because it is actually becoming a public health crisis in this time of a pandemic. So that's one thing I've been thinking about a lot, and I hope the students will also think about it as they go into the summer and into next semester.
That is fantastic. Ulises and Serenity, thank you so much for your time. From Suarez Basement, we send you all our love and our care, and we hope that you guys are safe and healthy, and that we can see each other in some point in person and have, a good glass of wine and just see each other face to face. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francisco.